Okay, let's unpack this. Today, we're diving deep into something absolutely fundamental, really. It affects millions of lives. It's food security,
Yeah, it's a core challenge, isn't it, for governments everywhere.
definitely. At its heart, it's just making sure everyone, everywhere, has consistent access to enough food, to live a healthy, active life.
A basic human need. And for a country like India, so vast, so complex,
Right.
well, it has a really long and fascinating history, sometimes challenging too.
That's right. For this deep dive, we're specifically looking at India's journey, how it's trying to achieve food security for its huge population.
We'll look at how it went from, depending on others for food to basically achieving self-sufficiency in producing it.
But production, that's only part of the story, isn't it?
Exactly. We'll also get into the enormous public systems India built to manage all that food, how the government buys grains, stores them.
And then tries to get them to the people who need them most. And the costs involved, which are, well, pretty significant.
Very significant.
And crucially, this deep dive, it isn't just a history lesson or describing programs. Based on the source material you, the listener, have provided, we're going to tackle some really critical questions.
Yeah, like is this massive complex system actually doing what it's supposed to do?
Are there big cracks in it? Who's falling through?
Uh-huh. And ultimately, what does real, meaningful food security actually look like for India? Is it just about having enough grain or something more?
Absolutely. And just to be clear up front, everything we talk about today, the facts, the figures, the criticisms, it's all drawn exclusively from the sources you provided for this deep dive.
That's right. We're basically your guides through these documents, trying to pull out the key insights.
Think of us exploring the document stack for you. I'll be pointing us towards the key data, guiding us through the material structure.
And I'll try to connect those dots, give some context, and help us understand the deeper meaning behind what the sources are telling us.
Perfect. So let's start with that historical context, because you really need to understand where India started to grasp the systems it has now.
You do. The material makes it really clear. Right after independence, India was, well, pretty vulnerable when it came to food.
Relying on imports.
Primarily, yes. Started out as an importer of food grains, relying on outside sources. That's a tough spot for a new nation.
A huge challenge from day one, and the sources really stress that India has come a very long way since then.
Oh, definitely. The material emphasizes this major achievement moving towards and largely achieving self-sufficiency in food grains.
Through boosting domestic production over decades.
Exactly. Sustained effort there. It meant India wasn't solely dependent on imports anymore to feed its people.
And achieving that self-sufficiency, that was a massive milestone. But like you said, just producing enough grain isn't the end game.
Not at all. Once you have it, you need systems. You need to manage it, distribute it, especially in a country with so much poverty.
Right. And this is where the source material really zooms in. It focuses on two main mechanisms India developed, the pillars of its strategy, really.
That's it. The buffer stock system and the public distribution system, the PDS. They're the two key things the sources focus on.
And they're linked, aren't they? One manages supply, the other manages distribution.
Fundamentally linked, yes.
Okay, let's start with that first pillar then, the buffer stock system. The name suggests a reserve, but what does it actually involve in India?
Well, a buffer stock, as the sources describe it, is basically a government-held reservoir of food grains, wheat and rice mostly.
And India's system is quite unusual in its scale.
Yeah, the sources highlight that. India is one of the few countries globally with such a massive government-run buffer stock operation. It's a huge logistical exercise.
And there are specific reasons why they hold these massive stocks, right? It's not just random hoarding.
Correct. The material lays out three main goals for these buffer stocks. First, the obvious one, maybe, a safety net for emergencies.
Like natural disasters.
Exactly. Widespread droughts, floods, things that wipe out crops. Having these stocks means the government can quickly send food aid to affected areas.
Makes sense. Emergency response. What's the second goal?
Price stabilization. This is key. If there's a crop failure or some other supply shock, market prices for essentials can shoot up, become unaffordable.
So the government steps in.
Right. By releasing grain from its buffer stock into the open market, it can increase supply, help cool down prices, prevent hoarding or speculation, make food more accessible.
Using the stock to smooth out those market bumps. And the third reason connects to the PDS.
It does directly. The third stated purpose is simply to provide the actual food grains needed for the public distribution system itself. That network needs a continuous supply to get subsidized food out.
And managing all this, the buying, storing, releasing that falls mainly to one big agency.
Yes, the Food Corporation of India, the FCI. The sources are clear. FCI has the prime responsibility for procuring these food grains from farmers.
How do they get the grain? Just buy it on the market.
Not mainly. It's mostly done at what's called the minimum support price, MSP.
MSP. We hear that term a lot.
Yeah.
What is it exactly, according to the sources?
The sources define it as the price the government guarantees it will pay farmers for their grain. It's meant to be a safety net for farmers, an incentive to produce.
So farmers know they have a buyer at a set price. What happens after FCI buys it at MSP?
It gets stored. FCI runs this huge network of warehouses all across the country, different locations.
Okay.
From there, they manage the supply. They release grain to state governments for the PDS, or like we said, for selling in the open market if needed.
And that open market selling, that's the price stabilization part again.
Yeah, correct. If market prices get too volatile, especially if harvests are bad, FCI can sell some stock directly to increase supply and hopefully bring prices down for everyone.
Okay, so that's the system's mechanics. Now, the government sets targets, norms, for how much grain it should hold at different times of year. What's the typical maximum norm the sources mention?
The sources specify a maximum norm, the target level, of T7 million tons.
Wow.
That's the combined stock of wheat and rice the government is supposed to hold to meet those objectives we just talked about.
T7 million tons. Got it. Now, here's where the sources reveal something really striking, where the complexity starts to show. The actual amount they hold is often vastly different.
This is where it gets really interesting, yeah, and points to some core issues. The sources say the government consistently holds many multiples more than that required T7 million ton norm.
Many multiples more. Wow. What kind of actual numbers are we talking about?
Well, the figures cited are usually around over 50-60 million tons, and the sources even mention that stocks have sometimes been even higher than that in the past.
So a norm of T7 million, but reality is 50, 60, maybe more. That's a massive gap.
It's a huge discrepancy, yeah.
It really begs the question, why?
Hmm.
Why is India holding on to so much more grain than its own rules say it needs?
The sources link this directly back to that MSP procurement process. Remember, the rule is, at the MSP, FCI has to buy whatever quantity farmers bring to sell.
There's no off switch based on stock levels.
Not at the MSP level, no. If there's a bumper crop, great monsoon, and farmers bring tons and tons of grain, FCI is obligated to buy it all.
Okay, so mandatory buying is one factor.
And there's another crucial bit the sources add. Even if the open market price happens to be higher than the government's MSP,
Farmers might still sell to FCI. Why?
because FCI buys in bulk. It's a guaranteed sale, often less hassle for the farmer dealing with large quantities. Selling bits and pieces in the open market can be trickier, more uncertain.
The convenience and certainty of a bulk sale, even if the price is slightly lower sometimes.
Often, yes. So you combine that mandatory procurement at MSP with farmers often preferring the guaranteed bulk sale.
Especially in good harvest years.
And boom, you get this buildup of stocks way, way beyond the buffer norms. The system essentially guarantees purchase, regardless of how much is already stored.
That explains how the excess stocks pile up. But holding that much extra grain,
Yeah.
that creates its own problems, doesn't it? The source is pretty critical here.
They are. Big problems. First off, just not enough proper storage space. Even with 50-60 million tons or more in stock, the sources say the actual dedicated, good quality storage capacity is limited. Maybe not more than 50 million tons total.
So they literally might not have enough proper warehouses for all the grain they buy.
That seems to be the issue. And it's made worse because, second point, even the storage they do have is often described as not appropriate.
Meaning not good quality.
Yeah, think less modern silos, maybe more open storage, or older warehouses not great at protecting from weather, pests, that kind of thing.
And inadequate, inappropriate storage leads to, well, predictable results.
Leads to tremendous wastage. And the sources give a figure here that just makes you stop. An estimated around 50,000 crore annually is wasted.
Wait, 50,000 crore rupees every year. Wasted because of poor storage.
That's the figure cited. Lost to spoilage, pests, moisture damage, all because there isn't enough good storage. Or the grain is kept too long in poor conditions due to the sheer volume.
That number is huge, 50,000 crore. It really drives home the cost of this inefficiency.
It's a massive drain. Think what else that money could do. It highlights this paradox. You build up huge stocks for security, but lose a huge chunk because you can't store it right.
Okay, so that's the buffer stock side, its purpose, the FCI, the MSP link leading to overstocking. and the shocking cost of wastage from bad storage. Now let's shift to that second pillar, the public distribution system, PDS. This is how the government tries to get that grain to people, especially the poor.
Correct. PDS is the main channel. The sources explain that the grain from the central stocks managed by FCI is supplied to the state governments, and it's supplied at a specific price.
Called the issue price, and that's deliberately low.
Yes, the sources are very clear. The issue price is much below their economic costs.
Okay, define economic cost here.
It's basically everything the government spent to get that grain to the state. So the MSP paid to the farmer, plus all the costs for transport, storage, handling, administration, the whole lot.
So the government sells grain to states for much less than it costs them. The difference has to be made up somehow.
Exactly. The central government bears that difference. That difference is the food subsidy.
And like the wastage figure, this subsidy number is enormous.
It is. According to the sources, the annual food subsidy bill is over an 5,000 crore.
Wow. Over 75,000 crore. Just for the subsidy. Add that to the 50,000 crore in wastage. We're talking vast sums of public money here.
Truly substantial figures.
So the states get this subsidized grain. How does it then reach the families?
Through a network of special government-controlled shops, commonly called fair price shops, families who have the right ration card can go there and buy their allocated amount of subsidized grain.
Now, the PDS itself has changed over time, hasn't it? The sources trace its evolution. It wasn't always targeted just at the poor.
That's a really important point. Initially, PDS was a general entitlement system, meaning all citizens, regardless of income, could technically buy fixed amounts of grains, sugar, oil at prices lower than the market.
So a universal benefit, in theory.
That was the early model. But issues arose, inefficiencies, and the government tried to refine it. The sources mention the revamped PDS, or RPDS, launched in June 1992.
What was different about RPDS?
It focused specifically on about 1775 blocks, mostly in backward or remote areas. The goal was better targeting towards the poor in those regions, and also trying to tackle pilferage and diversion of grain, which was already a problem.
Okay, a step towards targeting.
Yeah.
And that led to the big shift. The targeted PDS, TPDS.
Exactly. TPDS came in nationwide from June 1997. This was a fundamental change. No more universal entitlement. TPDS specifically aimed for subsidized distribution to poor families. The focus narrowed.
And this is where those categories came in. BPL, APL.
Yes. Under TPDS, households were classified below poverty line, BPL, above poverty line, APL, and later a special category for the absolute poorest, the Antyodaya Anna Yojana, or AAY.
The sources give some details on how TPDS changed over the years. The amounts, who qualified. Can you walk us through that?
Sure. Initially, TPDS aimed to cover about 6 crore, that's 60 million poor families. About 7.2 million tons of grain were set aside for them annually. Identifying who was poor was up to the states, using Planning Commission poverty estimates as a guide.
And the system got tweaked.
Yeah. In 2000, they increased the amount for BPL families from 10 kilograms to 20 kilograms per family per month, and the price was set at 50% of the economic cost, so heavily subsidized. APL families also had adjustments, but paid more. They also updated the poverty numbers used around then.
And the BPL amount went up again.
Yep, from 20 kilograms to 25 kilograms per family per month, starting July 2001.
What about that AAY scheme for the very poorest?
AAY was launched separately in December 2000, targeted the bottom 2.5 crore or 25 million BPL families. They initially got 25 kilograms per family per month at super low prices. Just 3 kg per kilograms for rice, 2 kg for wheat.
Then came another change in 2002, affecting everyone.
Right. From April 1st, 2002, the allocation was standardized across all categories, APL, BPL, and AAY, to a uniform 35 kilograms per family per month.
Why the change to a uniform amount?
The source says it was to enhance the food security at the household level, basically ensuring every eligible family got a substantial fixed amount.
So after 2002, it was 35 kilograms per family for everyone eligible. But the price they paid was still different.
Absolutely. That was the key difference under TPDS. BPL families paid half the price APL families paid for grains, sugar, kerosene, and AAY families had their own even lower specific prices for rice and wheat. That price differentiation was crucial.
And there was that small provision for certain senior citizens too.
Yes, a specific group. Those 65 plus not getting the old age pension, they were eligible for 10 kilograms of grain free of cost.
Okay, so that's the PDS journey. Universal, then revamped, then targeted with BPL play, evolving quantities, and finally settling on 35 kilograms per family, but with different prices. On paper, looks like a system trying hard to reach the poor.
Looks that way, yes.
But the source material? Well, it's pretty blunt about how TPDS actually worked on the ground.
It really is. Doesn't mince words. The sources state very directly, clearly it is not the schemes, but the delivery channel which has failed us.
So the problem wasn't the idea of TPDS, but the execution. The pipes were leaky.
That's exactly the conclusion drawn. The problem lies in the practical mechanics of getting the food to the right people.
Let's dig into those specific failures the sources highlight. The first one seems absolutely fundamental. Figuring out who gets the benefit in the first place.
Yes, faulty identification of beneficiaries. This is called out as the main flaw. And the critical point here is a large chunk of those who are eligible have been left out.
So, genuinely poor people who should have gotten help were missed by the system.
A large number of them, yes. The system was failing to include many who needed it most.
Why was the identification so bad?
The sources point to the criteria. It was solely economical for BPL status. But measuring income or consumption accurately, especially for the poor, is incredibly hard. People might underreport, and there wasn't good national data at the household level.
So, hard to prove you were poor enough. But it wasn't just about leaving people out, was it? The sources also mentioned people getting included who shouldn't have been.
Exactly. The flip side, inclusion errors. The sources mention allegations that persons having political patronage have found a place in the BPL list, and state bluntly, not all BPM families are actually BPL, but are included.
So, non-poor people getting benefits, maybe through connections or errors.
That's the implication, which means resources weren't going where they were most needed.
So you've got eligible poor left out, ineligible non-poor included. It sounds like the targeted part of TPDS completely broke down.
It really undermined the whole concept. And there's the reverse error, too. Sources say many genuinely very poor families were wrongly classed as APL, above poverty line, and so were denied their right to the heavily subsidized grain. It's a mess on all sides of identification.
Okay, faulty identification is huge. What's the next big operational problem the sources point to?
This one's fascinating. They call it the no-exit problem.
No exit.
Yeah. Think about it. If a family's income improves, they move above the poverty line, technically they should come off the BPL list, right?
Logically, yes.
But the sources say they continue to do so. They stay on the list.
Why wouldn't they leave if they're doing better?
Well, the source points out there's a strong incentive to be classified as a BPL family. The benefits are significant, so no family would like this tag to go. They want to keep receiving the subsidized goods.
So the system itself discourages people from graduating out of poverty, at least in terms of their PDS status.
That's what the sources suggest. They state quite starkly, in the existing system, there is no exit but entry only. Once you're in, you tend to stay in.
And the result of this no-exit situation?
Well, first, it contributes to that ever-growing food subsidy bill we talked about, and ever-increasing liability for the government. And second, it means the benefits are increasingly not exactly those for whom it is intended. Resources going to families who might no longer be the most vulnerable.
Right. So even if the grain gets to the shop, the wrong people might be claiming it due to bad identification and this no-exit issue. What about the physical movement of the grain itself? Problems there, too.
Oh, major problems in the delivery system, according to the sources, from the warehouse to the shop to the person. One really alarming issue, bogus cards.
Bogus cards, like completely fake ration cards.
Exactly. And the sources cite a government survey figure here. Over 1.75 crore are bogus cards.
1.75 crore. That's 17.5 million fake ration cards.
17.5 million. It's a shocking number, circulating in a system meant for the poor.
It just blows my mind, the scale of potential fraud.
It's huge, and the sources say what makes it worse is there is no attempt to review the ration cards which are issued. No regular cleanup of the lists, so the bogus cards stay, the no-exit families stay. It just perpetuates the problem.
And where does all this lead? Fake cards, people staying on lists.
It fuels massive black marketing, hoardings, and their diversion to open market. Grain meant for the poor at low prices gets siphoned off, sold illegally for profit.
Do the sources estimate how much gets diverted?
They do. Citing government resources, they suggest as much as 20% of the food grains meant to be supplied under TPDS find their own way in the open market.
20%. 1/5 of the food just disappears into the black market.
That's the estimate.
Yeah.
So you've got the massive wastage in storage, maybe 50,000 crore lost there,
Uh-huh.
and then another 20% potentially leaking out through diversion and bogus cards in the distribution chain.
It means a huge amount of resources, and actual food is just not reaching the people it's supposed to help.
That's the critical takeaway on TPDS in practice. And there's one more problem mentioned about the grain that does get through.
Let me guess. Quality.
You got it. The quality of grains supplied under TPDS is often of suspect. They link it back to those poor storage conditions in FCI warehouses. If grain sits too long, in bad conditions.
By the time it reaches the fair price shop, it's not great quality.
Exactly. So you put it all together, faulty identification leaving poor out and non-poor in, the no exit issue, millions of fake cards, huge diversion, questionable quality. The source's final verdict on TPDS is pretty harsh.
What's the bottom line?
That TPDS in that form was not only inefficient, but critically, it does not reach out to the poor people. Besides, wastage and aversion is rampant.
And this leads the sources to point out a really stark irony. India has massive buffer stocks, way more than needed.
Huge government subsidies, spending billions.
Yet, despite all that food and money, there's still widespread hunger and about 270 million poor people in the country.
That's the central paradox the sources hammer home. Abundance here, hunger there, which leads them to ask that really pointed question, maybe for you, the listener, too. Can this be known as food security in India?
It's a powerful question. Having grain locked up in warehouses clearly isn't the same as people actually being fed and secure.
And the sources back this up with external views. They mention India's poor ranking in the Global Hunger Index, 67th out of 84 countries in one study cited, and international reports consistently saying India needs to tackle both hunger and malnutrition.
Which suggests just providing basic grains, even if it worked perfectly, might not be enough for true food security if nutrition is ignored.
Precisely. Malnutrition is a huge related issue.
Okay, so facing this reality, a TPDS riddled with problems, leakage, waste, the government knew something major had to change. Which brings us to the National Food Security Act, the NFSA, in 2013.
It does. The sources explain this was a major attempt to fix the big problem they saw with TPDS, the inclusion issue. Too many poor people being left out.
And the NFSA took a different approach to deciding who gets benefits.
Yes, a key conceptual shift. The sources say it moved away from inclusion to that of exclusion. Instead of trying to pinpoint exactly who is below poverty line, the idea was to cover a much larger chunk of the population by default, and then define specific categories of people who would be excluded from the benefit.
So assume most people are covered unless they fall into an excluded group, like maybe government employees or large landowners.
Something like that. Define who's out rather than verifying everyone who's in. And this led to the National Food Security Bill, which became the Act.
When was it passed?
Passed by Parliament on July 3, 2013. And a really key part. It aimed to give a legal right to subsidize food grain to a huge number, up to 67% of India's 1.2 billion people then.
A legal right for 2/3 of the population. That's massive.
Huge. And it included penalties for officials who didn't comply, trying to add accountability.
And the government moved fast on this.
Very fast. The sources mention the UPAI Thric, the government implemented it via an ordinance the very same day, July 3, 2013, called it a historic decision to get it started immediately.
What was the estimated cost?
Described as a massive 1.3 trillion rupee, $22 billion welfare program, shows the scale of the commitment.
The formal act came a bit later.
Yes, the National Food Security Act was formally passed into law on September 10th, 2013.
And its stated objective. What was it trying to achieve?
The sources quote it. To provide food and nutritional security in human life cycle approach by ensuring access to an adequate quantity of quality food at affordable prices to people to live a life with dignity.
Okay, so broader language there, nutritional security, dignity, life cycle approach. What were the actual coverage targets under this new exclusion approach?
It aimed to cover up to 75% of the rural population and up to 50% of the urban population. That averages out to about 2/3 of the whole country covered.
A huge expansion. What were the specific special features, the sources list? How did it work differently?
One really big change, individual entitlement. Instead of a fixed amount per family, eligible households get 5 kilograms of grains per month per person.
Ah, so a bigger family gets more grain, unlike the old 35 kilograms per family limit.
Potentially, yes. more tailored to household size. This applied to that 75% rural, 50% urban population.
And the prices? Still heavily subsidized.
Very. The sources state the prices. 3 per kilo for rice, 2 per kilo for wheat, 1 per kilo for coarse grains.
What about the poorest of the poor, the AAY families?
They continued. The act kept the Antyodaya Anna Yojana. Those households still got their larger fixed amount, 35 kilograms per month, at those same very low prices.
Did the NFSA include other benefits besides grain?
Yes, it aimed for broader nutritional support. Pregnant women and lactating mothers were entitled to a maternity benefit of at least 6,000 rupees.
And for kids?
Children aged 6 months to 14 years were entitled to take-home rations or hot-cooked meals, trying to tackle child malnutrition directly through programs like ICDS and midday meals.
How did it divide the work between the central government and the states?
The center kept the job of buying the grain, allocating it to states, and transporting it to state depots. It also promised financial help if states faced shortages and assistance with the costs of moving grain within the state to the fair price shops.
And that feature about women.
Right. The sources mention that in a bid to give women more authority, the oldest adult woman in the household would be considered the head for issuing the ration card, trying to empower women regarding the family's food entitlement.
Okay, so the NFSA looks like a major overhaul. Rights-based, much wider coverage, includes nutrition aspects, tries to empower women. Seems like a big step forward.
On paper, yes, it addressed some key criticisms of the old TPDS.
The source material doesn't just leave it there, does it? It raises quite a few issues and questions about the NFSA itself.
It does, immediately pivots to potential problems. First, that question of food security versus nutrition security.
Back to that point.
Yes. While the Act mentions nutritional security, the main benefit is still grains. The sources argue true security needs a focus on a basic nutrition basket of goods to fight malnutrition properly.
Because just giving rice and wheat, even to more people, doesn't fix underlying vitamin or protein deficiencies.
Exactly. The sources say mere inclusion of coarse cereals will not allow building nutrition security. They stress again India's poor malnutrition stats. Is the Act really tackling that, or just hunger?
A fair question. What about the practical side? Implementation challenges.
This is a huge concern in the sources. How can you roll out such a massive level scheme effectively if the underlying delivery system problems, the leakage, the corruption, the inefficiency we talked about with TPDS aren't fixed first?
So a new law doesn't magically fix the broken pipes.
Not automatically, no. And they also question the relative ability of the state governments to handle the sheer logistical load of this vastly expanded system. It can well defeat the very purpose of reaching out to the poor.
And the procurement needed for 2/3 of the population must put a strain on the system too.
Absolutely. Procuring that much grain requires a massive scaling up of storage capacity in facilities. Given the existing storage problems, that's a huge hurdle.
Could India even produce enough?
The sources raise the possibility that India may well need to import food grains to meet the NFSA demand, which could affect global prices and domestic prices too.
And then there's the money, the cost of this massive subsidy.
A critical long-term worry. It's not just the current budget, but the fact that it's likely a continuous and the increasing liability in perpetuity, a huge ongoing cost. The sources ask bluntly, how long can it be sustained?
A tough question for any government. Finally, the sources raise a more philosophical or socioeconomic question.
The complacency question, yeah. They ask, will such a scheme not provide complacency of shying away from work with the assured food available?
The idea that a guaranteed safety net might reduce the incentive to work for some.
It's presented as a concern to be aware of, a potential unintended consequence of such a large entitlement program. It's a complex debate, obviously.
Definitely complex.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've seen the history, the old systems and their flaws, the NFSA reform attempt, and the serious questions raised even about that. What do the sources suggest needs to happen now? What are the actions needed for real food security?
They lay out several key areas. Top of the list, maybe the biggest challenge, is fixing that identification problem.
Back to figuring out who actually needs the help.
Exactly. If you can't get that right, nothing else works properly. The sources are skeptical of old methods, saying BPL cards proved you were a beneficiary, but not a conclusive proof of being below poverty line.
What about Aadhaar, the unique ID system? Does that help?
The sources discuss Aadhaar. They say it provides a unique identity, which is useful. But crucially, it doesn't provide the income or consumption data needed to determine poverty status. So it helps verify who someone is, but not how poor they are.
So Aadhaar is part of the puzzle, but not the whole solution for targeting based on need. What about that exclusion method the government was looking at?
Right, excluding easily identifiable non-poor groups like car owners, government employees. The challenge there, the sources say, is getting broad consensus on the categories to be excluded. You can't have different states excluding different groups, needs uniformity.
How to achieve that?
The suggestion is the central government should set the broad parameters of exclusion through consensus and let states do just the fine-tuning.
Okay, fixed identification, what's next? It links back to that nutrition point.
Yes, shift the focus firmly to nutrition security. Food security is nutrition security. Just giving grains to malnourished people isn't enough. It might even be a bigger damage.
Need a balanced diet, not just calories.
Exactly. The goal should be not only to feed, but also have a fit population, maybe broaden the food basket, or find other ways to ensure access to nutritious food.
What about fixing those leaky pipes? The delivery system itself.
Absolutely critical. Leverage technology. The sources strongly recommend computerizing the entire TPDS operation: procurement, storage, movement, final distribution.
End-to-end computerization.
Yes, plus a technology-leveraged tracking mechanism nationwide. They admit it's tough, but feasible, especially using the Aadhaar database for identity. This could create an efficient food management system, cutting down leakage.
And the storage problem. All that wastage.
Needs urgent action. Increase storage capacity significantly, at least by about 15-20 million tons in the immediate short run.
How to build that much capacity quickly.
They suggest public-private partnerships, PPPs. Partnering with the private sector could help streamline building storage, improving facilities, transport, the whole delivery chain.
The sources also float a more radical idea for delivering the subsidy itself, right?
Yeah, they do. Acknowledging that any subsidy system tends to have leaks, especially an in-kind one like giving out grain.
Which can be diverted or sold.
Right. So they suggest a potentially better way: providing direct income support. Give people the cash value of the subsidy instead of the grain itself.
Like a direct benefit transfer, DBT?
Exactly. Their example: if market rice is 15 kilograms and PDS is 3 kilograms, give the person €12 cash per kilogram. They can then buy it themselves in the market.
What's needed for that to work?
Two things: reliable identification, Aadhaar helps here, and access to a bank account for the transfer.
What if bank accounts aren't universal?
They also mention smart cards with embedded monetary values. Load the subsidy value onto a card the person can use to buy food at market prices. Similar idea, less reliant on banks.
Either way, cash or smart cards could cut out a lot of the diversion happening with physical grain.
That's the hope. Less opportunity for leakage in the supply chain. Finally, the sources talk about the most fundamental long-term solution.
The teach a man to fish idea.
Precisely. They quote that principle, saying fundamentally food security is about more than just handouts.
It's about empowerment, earning a living.
Yes. The sources identify the core issue for sustainable food security in India as creating employment opportunities for the people. That has to be the larger part of the strategy.
Because if people can earn a decent livelihood,
They can buy what they need, including a nutritious diet. It's about their relative ability to earn a livelihood with which they can purchase what they wish to consume. That's seen as the ultimate goal.
are other things needed alongside jobs?
Yes, improving agricultural productivity is still vital, and working on the supply chain to make sure a minimum nutrition basket is actually available and affordable in the market.
But the main focus should be enabling people to earn, with exceptions for those who genuinely can't.
Exactly. Government support for those unable to work, disabled, elderly without support should be matter of exception rather than a rule. The main thrust should be jobs and livelihoods.
So the overall vision for food security here is really broad, much more than just grain distribution.
Much broader. It's tackling hunger, malnutrition, and poverty, fixing delivery systems, identifying the needy accurately, and crucially, creating economic opportunity, all aimed at getting rid of absolute poverty and achieving real security.
Okay, to wrap up, the sources list a final summary of the key challenges India still faces. It's quite a list.
It is, shows the complexity. They list things like the faulty food distribution system itself, poorly monitored nutritional programs, lack of coordination between government departments, need for ongoing improvement in farm productivity, finding effective, sustainable food storage solutions, ensuring availability and access for the actual poor, FPPL, improving purchasing power via jobs, diversifying crops, maybe local grain banks, more community awareness and social audits, timely evaluation of nutrition programs, and better community participation and coordination.
Wow, that really covers everything from farm to fork, plus health and economics. It shows food security isn't one single problem.
Not at all. It's deeply interconnected with so many aspects of development. It's not just about having food, but ensuring the right food gets to the right people efficiently and ultimately empowering people to access it themselves.
So we've traced India's path, looked at the big systems like buffer stocks and PDS, seen the deep flaws, the NFSA reform attempt and its own challenges, and the range of actions needed going forward.
And understanding all this complexity, the history, the ongoing issues, it really helps you, the listener, grasp the reality behind huge government policies and how they affect millions, especially the most vulnerable.
Absolutely. And thinking back to that question, can this be known as food security? When hunger persists despite overflowing stocks and linking it to that idea of needing to earn a livelihood, it does leave you with a big thought to ponder.
Yeah. If real security means people earning enough to access a nutritious diet themselves, how does a system focus mainly on buying, storing, and distributing grain need to fundamentally change?
And given all the wastage and leakage, how crucial is technology, or maybe direct cash support, in actually transforming how aid reaches people? Can we finally bypass those broken pipes?
These are the huge questions the material leaves us with as India keeps working on this immense challenge of ensuring food security for everyone.
A lot to think about indeed.